The idea of politics is being torn apart from three directions. On one side, it is reduced to endless warfare. On the other, it is dissolved into universal morality. And in the middle, the very academic discipline designed to study it has tried to turn it into a sterile science. To understand what we are losing, we have to start with a baseline definition. In 1962, the political scientist Bernard Crick laid out what politics actually means. Crick defined it as a distinct human activity where conflicting interests are settled through discussion, persuasion, and debate. It is the explicit alternative to settling disputes by force or fraud. To defend politics today, we must reject the hyper-nationalist drive for war, the dream of a borderless world, and the illusion of quantifying behavior. If we fail, we lose the crucial art of political judgment entirely. The framework required to diagnose our current dysfunction comes from Aristotle. In his Nicomachean Ethics, he taught that all virtue, every excellence of habit and mind, exists as a mean. It is a center point that carefully balances between two destructive extremes of excess and deficiency. This spectrum maps politics between two distinct extremes. On one end sits unyielding absolute nationalism. On the opposite end sits a borderless, universal morality where local allegiances mean nothing. The fragile center is the regime, the only space where actual politics can survive. Understanding this center requires a close examination of how those two ideological extremes actively work to destroy it. The most potent argument for the extreme of hyper-nationalism was articulated in 1927 by the German legal philosopher Carl Schmitt in his book The Concept of the Political. This diagram visualizes Schmitt's foundational axiom, the inescapable binary of friend and enemy. He categorized all human groups strictly by who is with us and who is against us. Using this binary, Schmitt treats extreme situations as the norm. He reduces all political life to an endless struggle for power, defined entirely by existential war or the constant preparation for it. To Schmitt, appeals to human rights, free trade, or international democracy are useless. He viewed them merely as evasions of the inevitable fact of human conflict. But a doctrine of unremitting war contains a fatal logical flaw. The struggle between friend and enemy wouldn't remain exclusively an interstate rivalry. The logic of bitter partisanship inevitably bleeds inward. It cuts down into the fabric of domestic affairs, forcing factions to view each other as enemies, sparking endless civil conflicts. Reducing politics strictly to warfare destroys the state from the inside out, making the theory completely anti-political. The threat from the opposite end of the spectrum comes from Immanuel Kant's philosophy of hyper-cosmopolitanism. This grid represents Kant's kingdom of ends. In this model, moral obligations are completely universal. Citizenship is treated as an arbitrary accident of birth, dissolving national boundaries and reducing human beings to uniform nodes of equal moral value. The desire to replace sovereign states with international tribunals ignores a stark reality. As Thomas Hobbes observed, covenants without the sword are but words. Kant's philosophical framework heavily influenced the 20th century, emerging 100 years later in Woodrow Wilson's 14 Points following World War I. It served as the foundation for the United Nations and the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. Yet international bodies are notoriously slow and ineffective at curbing aggressive behavior. They offer sweeping moral condemnations, but lack the mechanisms to actually enforce them. Wishing away the state to create a utopia of global justice is a naive fantasy. It uproots populations from their traditions and leaves them without the protective shield of a functioning political order. Escaping these two extremes brings us back to the center of the spectrum, the only space equipped to handle actual political life. This cross-section shows the architecture of the regime. It is a constitutional order, where formal top-level structures, like laws and voting systems, are built directly on top of foundational layers, what Aristotle called the ethos, the distinct character and manners of a society. The top layers require two universal conditions to function: the strict rule of law and a system structured explicitly for the benefit of the governed rather than the rulers. but the foundation consists of deeply particular requirements. A regime relies on the unique history, the social habits, the religious traditions, and the scientific imagination of a specific people living in a specific place. A legitimate political regime thrives on its ability to maintain a precarious balance between abstract, universal laws and the particular lived identity of its citizens. This diagram shows the threat to that balance from modern universities. Civic education is being actively replaced by game theory and rational choice modeling. This model treats politics like a marketplace. It entirely redefines citizens as rational actors whose only goal is to maximize their own individual utility. This strips away any concept of civic obligation to our fellows. Complex moral choices are reduced to blind, consumer-like preferences. By attempting to turn the study of politics into a hard science like physics, the discipline is forced into an artificial posture of value neutrality. This neutrality operates as a form of nihilism. The modern discipline accords legitimacy to every preference, refusing to evaluate what citizens should actually prefer. In the rush to perfectly quantify human behavior, modern political science has abandoned the exact art it was created to teach. Politics is not a state of unremitting war. It is not a system of universal morality, and it is certainly not a hard science. It is a practical art. The cognitive skill required to practice this art is political judgment, or what the ancients called prudence. Political judgment is distinct from the technical expertise required to manufacture a physical object, and it is entirely separate from the theoretical search for abstract laws governing human behavior. Instead, it is the precise knowledge of what is fitting and appropriate. It requires the ability to adapt to unforeseen situations and decipher the right course of action for a particular people at a particular time. This capacity cannot be solved by mathematical algorithms or learned by rote memorization. It requires nuanced human insight, cultivated only through immersive experience. If the modern university system is failing to teach this, we run into a critical question once posed by Karl Marx: who will educate the educators? The most reliable cure is to abandon scientific matrices and return to the study of old books. We have to study foundational philosophical and legal documents. Texts like the Declaration of Independence and the Federalist Papers display the exact structural logic required to build and maintain a regime. These theories must then be supplemented by astute psychological literature, authors like Leo Tolstoy or Jane Austen, to see how human nature, persuasion, and deliberation actually operate in practice. Finally, we have to study the applied deeds of historical statecraft, looking at leaders like Abraham Lincoln. Examining figures like Winston Churchill provides a virtual education in managing extreme tension and navigating national crises. We do not read these classic texts to find abstract mathematical rules. We read them to witness moral reasoning in action. Cultivating that judgment is the only way to forge citizens capable of protecting the political regime.